one of the things that I wrote an article called the STING curve, which means Society's Total Investment in Government.
And what is that? It's an acronym.
That's correct, STING, STING. Mm-hmm. And what that means, and I try to analyze on that article, not so much from the quantitative point of view, but how you can start with a society with no government at all, which of course we wouldn't pay any taxes, and we would have no return for government, to a society where you pay more of taxes and you get some return in investment. And then as you pay more taxes and you increase the size of government, you of course have more costs, but the return on investment is actually a little bit less every time, until you reach an optimum point, after which the more you invest in government, the less is the return on investment. Up to the point where, of course, if everybody worked for the government, there would be no production, no taxes to pay, and the whole society would collapse. Well, the analysis I try to do is, where are we on that curve? And I would say in the 1800s we were at zero. In the 1900s, at the beginning of the century, we were paying something like 5–9% taxes. So it was okay to increase the size of government. But if you go all the way to the 50s and 60s, we had very little return for increasing cost of government. So today we are on the descending side of this curve. What that means is that, in fact, if we want to help the poor, and we increase the size of government by giving government more money of our taxes, what happens is that everybody is going down instead of up, which means we are not actually helping the very people, the poor, that we are trying to help.
And yet one of your policies is affordable and adequate housing. Who pays for that?
Well, it's interesting.
That's a dilemma, isn't it?
No, not really. We have a solution. And the reason I'm saying that is because through an architect, we came up with a very interesting policy, which is a policy that tries to stimulate home ownership. Instead of the government paying for housing, what we would do, we would have affordable housing to the level of $50–60,000 per house without garage, with the garage maybe $10,000 more, by reducing the size of square feet. And I can tell you a little more of the technicalities of it. But what would that do is to help people to want to invest in a house, because the mortgage payment would be probably less than the rent that they would pay in an apartment. And so by stimulating home ownership, the people would be more interested in keeping that house and not make it in a slum. And we would build two in a single unit that would look about the same as a standard house, but is actually two families living on it.
Before we go into any more details, I'm going to turn to Lloyd now and ask, sort of for general basic principles, and perhaps now that you've heard Guiseppe, you can start contrasting maybe a little bit.
Well, I think the first fundamental contrast comes up on the point of what is the fundamental building block of society. And with Freedom Party, we would say it's the individual. The family is a collection of individuals with a very special relationship, and I agree with Guiseppe on that, in that regard. But we believe that it is the individual that's the fundamental unit, and that it's the role of the government to protect the rights of the individual. And to that end, we don't believe in group rights, only in individual rights, because no one should get any special conditions simply by virtue of belonging to some other group.
Can I interrupt you at this point?
Do you mind if he interrupts you at this point?
I don't mind.
Well, you say it's a point on contrast. In reality, it is not, because I did not say that the family has group rights. The family, I said, is a fundamental building block of society.
The family, isn't it?
We'll get to that, because the definition is very important, and both the conservatives and the liberals are doing some strange things on the definition of the family. But as far as rights, I agree 100% with you. The rights are only individual rights. The family by itself has no rights, only privileges. that government may grant to the family for some reasons.
That's what most people refer to as rights. When the government grants privilege to any special interest group or to any other group, they get the name of right attached to them. And so I would be very careful, because I disagree. I think you're saying
that
the
is
family
wrong.
has rights.
That is wrong. I'm not saying that. In fact, what I'm talking about is fundamental principles. And the fundamental principles I mentioned is three: right to life, right to freedom, right to ownership of properties. And from these three rights, all the other rights derive.
Why use the word family then at all? Because what you're really talking about is people, aren't you?
Well, because the family has been under attack from several ways, in several ways, and from several parties. And the family has a particular role in society, which is raising our kids, which is educating our kids. And the family, the parents are the primary educators.
But what do you do with such things as parental violence or spousal violence? I mean, that's all part of the family, isn't it?
Well, of course, we have
Once
to,
you get into that,
stop that. There's no question.
But how do you stop it, though? That's where government comes in.
Well, of course. But, you know, we're talking about rights. And if you want to be very careful with rights, rights are not absolutes. We stated right on paper. Rights are not absolutes. That means that my right ends when his right begins.
So your point,
that's
Lloyd...
That's exactly the meaning of rights. My rights do end where yours begin. But they are indeed absolute. Because if they're not absolute, then they don't exist at all. And that's the current situation that we're in today, where you said the family is under attack. Well, for a much longer time, the rights of the individual have been under attack.
That's correct.
I mean, since the 1680s, under Frontenac, when he governed Quebec, the comment of the time was that Canada was overgoverned. Still is to this day. We have a long history of that.
I don't disagree with that.
Yeah.
What about such things as property rights? I mean, do you know, in your platform, Lloyd, property rights is very important. Does the Family Coalition Party have any policy on ownership or property?
Well, we say this property rights are the third fundamental right. And from property rights come all the other rights as far as ownership, as far as free enterprise, as far as commerce and everything else. So it is very important. It is the third most important fundamental right that we can find.
Absolutely. I think it's an enabling sort of thing. If you don't have property rights, then you really can't exercise your rights at all. I think Guiseppe is right on the money with that.
Family Coalition believes in dignified support for the lower end of society, the poor, the less well-off. There again, I mean, does that not bring more government in?
Well, it might, but we have to again clarify. Let me give you an example. The City of Toronto, I think it was yesterday or the day before, said that they're going to solve the problem of the squeegee kids. And so what they're going to do, they're going to give them a couple of $1 million and do something with it. That's exactly what we are against. You cannot define that the squeegee kids are poor. They're young, they're able to work, they should work, society should now maintain them. You know, you have to be very careful. If there's a person who is either disabled or incapacitated to work for some reason, then of course society has reason and a duty to help these people. A single family, single mother, some situations are.
So you're saying specifically the squeegee kids are capable of supporting themselves. How would you encourage them, or what would you? Because everything I can think of involves government money. Would you educate them to do something? That's government money.
I think simply, in particular with squeegee kids, they're able to work, they're younger than me, they can find a job probably easier than I do. And so they just, society, by lowering taxes, for example, and having more money in the pockets of individuals and families, can certainly create more jobs. They probably don't pay
taxes, though. You're not helping them by lowering
No,
taxes.
actually, what you do is when you lower taxes, you create an environment, you're lowering everyone's taxes, I hope. You're creating an environment where employment can flourish.
That's correct.
One of the other things that we have right now that helps keep them unemployed are such things as minimum wage laws. It may well be that they're out there working as squeegee kids, making below minimum wage. Well, can't they be employed somewhere at a lower wage? I don't think minimum wage doesn't serve to do anything except keep a certain portion of the population unemployed. I can remember my mother-in-law had a variety store. When the minimum wage was raised, what happened was the part-timers that worked for her, their hours were cut back, and she simply put in more hours of work. It didn't do anything to raise anyone's income. It serves as a deterrent to allowing people to get into the workforce. Because let's face it, people working at minimum wage and lower, those are generally entry-level type jobs. And you let someone work at a job like that and develop a work history, they will advance. And I think we start people off with a great handicap right now by simply saying, even though you've never really worked in a good job, we're going to arbitrarily say that you're worth this much an hour, and that's simply not true.
Let's move on to something which is dear to all our hearts, figuratively and literally, the healthcare system. You both have policies, your parties have policies. Yours, Lloyd, looks to me as if you're trying to move towards a more privately financed. Is that a correct interpretation? Insurance-based, what does that mean?
That would be it. When OHIP came in, I think it was something like 82 or 83% of the population had private insurance. So what happened is the government came in, nationalized an entire system in order to provide insurance for 18%. That, I think, was a terrible mistake. Then the fact that they provide the service free, which we all know it costs money, but it's provided free, you end up with a system where it costs you nothing to go, therefore the demand grows, and you end up with the current situation where billions are spent on healthcare.
How would an insurance-based healthcare solve those problems, though?
It would, well, first off, it would, there would be checks and balances towards the expenses. Just as a very start, obviously an insurance company may well say, wait a second, this service isn't worth this. Right now we have no way of telling. One thing that I think could be done right now as a great starting point is when you go to the doctor, they should give you an itemized receipt that says how much OHIP is going to be billed for this.
I was going to say exactly the same thing, so yes,
because people have no idea.
They have no idea how much it costs.
Now,
I think
in your policy platform, fair and efficient health is how you term it. Now, what is the difference then between insurance-based plan and a fair and efficient
I cannot disagree that an insurance-based system would be better. Unfortunately, people in Ontario, they are not ready at this point. But we can start with some of the things that he just mentioned. Having an itemized bill when you get into a hospital would immediately tell $1,000. Did I spend that? There must be a mistake, and so people would go back. We would eliminate
maybe user fees for people who abuse emergency departments. By that, when somebody goes to an emergency department with a hangnail, there's something where a fee should be charged, I think.
Yeah, I cannot disagree with you. The people in Ontario are not prepared simply because they're used now to a healthcare system that is free. You can go anytime you want, anywhere you want, and get everything for free.
And I think that's why you introduce those things that indicate price.
Yeah, there is some measures that you can start right away. One of them is eliminating all the support and the government support for all elective procedures, okay?
For all
elective procedures.
Yes,
I mean, we get to a point, a ridiculous point of paying for sex change operations, some of the sex change operations.
Or
cosmetic procedures.
Yes.
Abortion, for example. Abortion is not an illness. People should pay for it. And people are flown from Northern Ontario to some clinic to have an abortion, and we pay for it. That's an elective procedure.
Yes.
So we can do a lot of things in that area.
And we're having pretty good influence in influencing the parties that are in power now to start seeing some of that. I think that's one of the roles that we've done between elections.
Well, let's take that up for the moment. I mean, my inclination would be for you two to join the mainstream parties in order for you to influence them. How in the earth do you expect your policies to be implemented in both cases? When
let me give you an idea. I think as far as family-oriented people who agree fundamentally with our policy, my belief is that in Ontario there may be about 30%. Now the question is that this 30% of the people who agree with our policies on family issues are divided between the major parties, mainly liberals and conservatives. What happens is that when these people get elected, even if they do elect representatives, there will be still a minority within each party. And so what happens is that we are completely divided between liberals, conservatives, family coalition party. And as far as the family coalition party, many people don't even know we exist. Why? Several reasons, and we may get into that. The unfairness of the system, the unfairness of the election system, and so on. But that's what we have right now, that people who are family-oriented and they believe in what we believe do not have a chance to be represented in government at all, because within a certain parties, we tried for about 20 years to elect candidates. I'll tell you an example. At the federal level, there was a group in Toronto called Liberals for Life, and they managed to elect 10 of their people as candidates in 10 ridings in Toronto. Well, Jean Chrétien came in very undemocratically and changed the 10 with radical feminists.
Oh, this was when he wanted more women in the Liberal Party. Yes.
And with that excuse, because it's an excuse, he just took 10 democratically elected
people. You didn't believe Jean Chrétien when he said he wanted... Why are you laughing today?
He took 10 democratically elected people and removed them from there. So how can you work within an established major party that is completely undemocratic, and you cannot even recur to the law?
Lloyd, what's your reason for staying on the margins forever?
Well, I'm not going to stay on the margins forever. I'm quite confident that we're a small party, but we're a large party getting started. But really, I think the whole thing about why aren't you in another party, or why don't you unite, and this is the whole issue of the Unite the Right campaign, and that is that the perception is that parties have to unite not in order to beat the other party, but in order to beat the electoral system. Because we have this system now where if you can get 39% of the vote, you can get 100% of the power.
Yes.
We elect the largest minority. So we're favoring proportional representation, which I know the Family Coalition supports as well.
Let me ask you a question. Who won the election in Quebec?
Yeah.
Yes, that's a good question. Yeah.
Under the rules that we have now, obviously, the Parti Québécois. But under a proportional representation system, it may
the
well
majority of the
different.
votes were for Jean Chrétien. And what kind of a system we have that we have
but
the government from a party who did not get...
We shouldn't believe that the proportional representative system is perfect, because it runs into problems
let me clarify that too.
It's far better than what we have now.
Let me clarify that too. There is no one proportional representation system. We can go in it's a very complex issue. However, there is various forms of mixed proportional representation. In fact, in all countries in the world, apart from England, United States, Canada, and part of Australia, there is a mixed system of representation where you have basically 50-50 proportional representation and 50 majority. And so that's what we want. We don't want a full proportional representation system.
Which differs from us.
Yeah.
We go
want a full.
We go with a full.
Even though New Zealand has
single transferable
run
vote.
into all sorts of problems. And
we've looked at a number of the systems that have come to the conclusion that the single transferable vote is the preferable system.
Yes.
To get a situation where the person's vote matters.
But would you ever win a seat in any system, though? I mean, are there enough people, either one or
Oh,
both?
yes.
There are.
Right now, we would have 2 or 3 people elected under a proportional system.
In Ottawa, in the federal system?
No.
In Ontario.
Yeah,
and the thing there is, when you get a situation like that where you have, at least in the House, you have some representation from the various parties, there's at least a voice there that's being heard constantly. I know the latest dog and pony show that the Conservatives are doing, they're going around on jobs and on job creation. I know there's a show going around. Mike Harris was in London. I contacted Queen's Park as soon as that was announced. Oh yeah, we'll get back to you. We were never allowed to speak at it because, of course, the purpose of that was to go around and promote the PCs in their pre-election campaign. But the fact is that many times we're shut out of things like that, where this would give an opportunity for a couple things to happen. One, for that voice to be heard in the House, in the legislature, and two, a person like me who has always voted for the loser, I've never been represented by anyone in government in this country in my life. And that's a shame.
There's a
I'm
couple
sure
of other
Giuseppe's
things.
in the same position.
There's a couple of other things. As I said before, we think we represent about 30% of the people. But if the people don't know we exist, these people will never vote for us. So it is absolutely unfair that we cannot be called, for example, at the leaders' debate at election time. And that would be my objective this time, to be at the leaders' debate. As far as proportional representation, many parties support some form of proportional representation, including the NDP, including some conservatives, including the Liberals. And I have documents to show you. So I think because there is a trend all over the world to go to some form of mixed proportion, it will happen. And that's why we have to be ready, because we will elect people. As far as totally proportional, and I disagree with you on that point, which is a minor point, but I've lived in Italy for many years. I'm Italian, of course, originally. Yeah. And you know what the government in Italy is. And in Italy themselves moved a little bit towards our system exactly to solve that problem, which is...
That's true, but there's absolutely nothing to indicate that the culture in Canada, the situations in Canada are different, and there's absolutely nothing, as far as I'm concerned, to indicate that the single transferable vote or a full proportional system would end up with the same results as Italy.
No, that's true.
There's nothing
that's
to indicate
that.
True. And I think...
I would be happier with that system than with the current system.
Oh,
because
absolutely.
the current system
right
is basically undemocratic.
Are you saying that Italy, which form does it have? More
Italy
proportional?
had full proportional representation. And because the government could not govern, and again, it's a cultural thing, there is 20 parties in Italy, and so to eliminate the proliferation of parties, what you do, you go a little bit towards our system, and what that prevents is small parties that have less than 2 or 3% of the vote.
But you see, if the fringe parties in Canada succeed, we'll end up with an Italian-style House of Commons,
not at all.
That's,
I don't,
well, let me tell you this.
Okay.
The system we propose, half and half, basically would mean that unless you have about 4 or 5% of the votes in Ontario, you will not be represented. Okay, and so I think that's a fair thing, because you cannot have a group of 100 people.
I don't think that's a fair thing at all.
To be as a political registered party, because for one thing, it's government. Okay, a party that is formed gets tax deductions for every donation, and so it costs us taxpayers. So if you allow any group to create a party, then you get again an increase in government.
It's funny that I hear you say that, because in the Netherlands, for example, they don't have that limitation, and if you suggest to someone in the Netherlands that you should have that, they'd go, why should a group of 3% of the population go unrepresented?
Yeah,
the problem that you indicate
I'm very sympathetic
of the government subsidizing political parties, I agree completely. Drop the subsidy.
Okay.
Drop the subsidy.
Yeah,
that's the answer.
I think that's a minor point, as I said before. We have a system that doesn't work. It's not democratic. We have to change it. Now, we may put on a multi-party commission or some kind to study what is the best system, and I would rather have a fully proportional system than a non-democratic system.
And I would agree that I'd rather step towards what Giuseppe is saying than keep what we have now.
It's amazing how you people agree. Why don't you join each other instead of, why wouldn't you be stronger in one party?
But because we can do a lot of things together if we choose to.
Yes.
There's nothing to say that I can't work with Giuseppe to say, yeah, here are 2 parties that favor proportional representation.
I may add one more thing, that the Libertarian Party is very much on the same lines as far as reduction of government, as far as economic situation.
And if you want proportional representation, the Green Party. A party that's on the left, again, with the NDP, they've been favoring it for a long time.
That's correct.
So
the NDP themselves favor it.
the NDP have just come on board.
How many fringe parties are there in Canada? Should we be frightened that some of you people might...
We don't call ourselves fringe party,
well,
but we have
important parties in the waiting.
A total of 9 to 11.
Just in Ontario, you have the Communist Party,
registered.
you have CORE, you have the Libertarians, Freedom Party, Family Coalition.
You might have up to a dozen to 15, maybe.
No, actually,
about a dozen.
That's them all in the... No, there's not that many. I think there's only 10, and one of them doesn't exist. That's
at the last election, there were
Ontario.
9, but at my last recollection, there were about 12 registered.
There's one I wanted to, in the last minute, I wanted to make a comment on one of your platforms, Giuseppe, and perhaps you can both comment on this. You think Sunday should be a day of rest. That's one of your, don't you remember, were you ever in Toronto for the old boring Toronto Sundays? Nobody would say that. You're from Italy, you miss those boring days in Toronto.
I don't think that, first of all, you probably got that issue from a platform of the last election.
You mean this is already eliminated?
It's not eliminated. The problem is we cannot implement it at this point when we have open Sundays.
Yes.
Let me go to a more important issue.
In the last 30 seconds.
There is 3 important issues that we stand for. One is education, and we talked about healthcare a little bit, and we talked about the economy. Education is, in our opinion, one of the 3 most important issues that affect families. And what we would do, we would go towards a voucher system, what we call a parental choice system,
which
where
is
the parents take
very
more responsibility.
You're in agreement. We've got 1 minute left. You continue to sum up, and then I'll get Lloyd to sum.
Where parents get more intervention on what the school is doing, what are they teaching to our kids. It's very important because the kids represent the future of this society.
Let me stop you and just, Lloyd, on that particular point, what about education in 15 seconds?
Well, again, we would go to the voucher system. We like the idea of parents being able to direct, say, their tax dollars to the school of their choice. What that allows is parents a lot more choice in where they send their kids, and I think that will have a definite impact on the curriculum and on education.
Good. I'll have to stop you there. We're out of time. Thank you both.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ray.